So the question becomes, where should the rib cage go and where should the abdominal contents go? I mean, it's all full of stuff. So here, and you two can correct me if this is not what your question was around. Yeah? Because Hannah and Rosa had different ideas about this. Should this billow out? Meaning, should this go out? When I was working with Ellen, we talked about the expansion of the belly. Should that expansion be like a ball and it moves down and forwards here? Or is the idea that the ball is inside of you? And if you thought of it that way, or the balloon, yeah? And it fills out all around you so that your back, in fact, gets closer to the floor. You see? So some people think of what you do, another version, would be to suck in the navel towards the spine. You hollow the stomach, and then you lift your head, because then theoretically you have nothing in the way in front, and you have more room, right? You'd have more space for the ribs to move down to the pelvis. So you have three ideas. This goes in. I'm going to put it my way. You compress your viscera, don't allow movement of the belly wall, and then draw your head up, right? Elbows to knees, whatever it might be. Or you billow out, which would tend to lead to hyperextension. There we go. And that's going to contradict the ability to lift the head mechanically, or the elbows to the knees, or the ribs to the pelvis. So supposing that the idea was that the ball is inside of you, where all of your liquids and gases actually are. So in a mechanical system, if you're thinking just in it is purely in engineering terms, then you have to leave liquids and gases out of the body. But in fact, you can handle the person's body even. We used to do that as an exercise years ago. I think we did that in your program, didn't we? We spent a day where we moved the body as a solid. And people did it. It was similar FI practice. You just did the thing and you pretended the person was just solid. Then you handled them as if they were liquid. And the whole body was just like, they had skin bag over water. And it was arranged like a human body. And then the other one was gases. They were just simply a gas. How would you handle them? And it was interesting to see the differences in the styles of handling. But in fact, we are all three. After all, Carl Jung thought that our soul resided in the spaces between our organs. So the soul must be a gas. Now, so Rashida, could you lift your head? Yeah, there. So she's trying one way, right? Yeah? This eventually could get in the way because the ribs now can't move down to the pelvis as far as they might. But the opposite strategy that's been sort of put out in large, large numbers because of a style, a look, an attitude, is to draw the navel in. So, yeah, do it that way. That idea, right? So, my suggestion is that think of the fingers and thumbs being pushed apart as you do the movement, so that you actually go wider laterally, and there's more space out here at the sides for all of the organs. Yeah? Look, this is now both pushing out and pulling wider. And it's doing that martial arts thing of creating a very, very solid stomach, but not one that's just simply dumping the spine. So you have more room for movement, more tautness and firmness and control, and you're not sucking anything in and holding your breath, because you can't breathe with your navel pulled in very easily. Your diaphragm's excursion is restricted. And you're also not billowing out and hyperextending your spine. So you have something that's in harmony with the movement. Try all three ways. Let's do pulling in first. How about, what do you want to do next? Okay, pushing forwards and out. Whoa, great. And now the idea.
Pregnant women.
Yeah, and then the idea of, that's it. Ooh, and look, you can see this come out right here, huh? Just then, huh? And this is firm.
But it's engaging a lot of these muscles too.
Engaging them in what way?
For me, I think it is like I have to stabilize myself here, to spread, to lift.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, I feel like I'm engaging.
But
more muscles being used, okay.
what, is that a bad thing or a good thing?
Right now it's a thinking thing.
Aha. Well, if you're lifting yourself mechanically, in a clean mechanical world with no gases and liquids, your knees would bend doing this. Well, your psoas muscle is shorter, and therefore you're being pulled from here, right? From the attachment of the psoas muscle. So there's a tendency for the hips to flex with the strongest hip flexors.
Right.
And your knees, therefore, are going to bend. Your knees bent when you did it. Listen, I don't mean like you stick your knees up, but there's a tendency, right? You just simply lift your head, and there's a tendency for the knees to bend or to soften in the back, because the hip flexors have to engage. They naturally have to. So it's something that I think is really critical, because it seems to be a lot of confusion about the issue. It just didn't come up, today. But in terms of ideas, because there's a promotion of a certain look of the navel drawn in and towards the spine, and like in the ATM lessons, the ATM lesson 2 days ago, which created some confusion in the group. So the idea, the next day, Sunday morning, somebody said to me, a couple of people actually, well, I found that difficult to suck my navel in towards my spine. Now, I've never said to anybody to suck your navel in towards your spine. So we did an exercise for those who weren't there to then sit up so that you could feel what I meant by drawing the navel towards the wall in back of you and feeling how your spine responds as you move your navel backwards and forwards. And now let's lie back on our stomach again and think of drawing it to the ceiling. So that was the instruction. But people can't hear sometimes past the concepts that are in the culture. And it's just like, okay, now what am I supposed to do? And so some people then brought up afterwards that they really weren't that happy with the lesson because they couldn't breathe. Well, but so it's difficult when you're languaging these things to realize, God, you could say anything close to what the person already has in their head, and they'll hear what they have in their head, But this is the idea, that you have a simultaneous pushing out in all directions evenly, so the diaphragm, in fact, makes its lowest excursion. This goes into the anatomy of the diaphragm, but remember the tendons for the diaphragm go to the front of the spine, way down there. So for the fullest excursion of the diaphragm and the greatest lowering of the center of mass, you go out everywhere. And your ground forces, if you will, go into the lower back.
People want to experience 3 different ways.
Try it. Try these 3 different ways, like Rashida just did. And you'll discover it can be a real confusion when people are drawing elbows to knees and they're told not to push their stomach out. And you'll also notice lots of times in Alexandrian eye lessons there are explicit instructions to push your stomach out. But that's not what he meant, was to just push it forwards and, have it just sort of billow. You're pushing it down, out, in all directions. But is that idea, is it clear? Do you want to practice it some more? Because we didn't really take time to do that. But it's something that I think should be really certain. So I was thinking, one thing to do would be to have you just where you are, just lie on your back. You will have room, just lie on your back. And could you bend your knees so you're standing on your feet? Now, in this position, could you lift your head? And again, putting your hands around your waist. Feel what happens. What happens to the distance between your fingers and your thumbs. That means to grab a pinch. It's as if you're pinching your waistline. Yeah? And see, do you separate your fingers? Yes? Not sure? That's right. So let's do it this way. What lessons, if you just thought of awareness through movement lessons that you know of all sorts, what lessons would be most helpful to evoke, if you will, a basic awareness of how to use that area? And like yesterday, we began the brain is the core of strength and stability workshop with a pelvic rock, right? And then the second thing we did was inhale, hold the breath, and move this imaginary ball of air up and down. Yeah. But let's just, starting with that. Inhale, hold your breath, and move the imaginary ball of air up and down, because this can be done in many different ways. Many different ways. In some people, it's a forwards movement. So think now that, you know, with this new possible information, and think, well, okay, when I push down and I expand the belly, I'm actually expanding all around, not in front of myself. So that you feel it in the back and in the waist. Is this someone's in the middle of here? Let's put it over here. And that you can get a sense of your back going to the floor as much as your stomach going to the ceiling. And the waist moving laterally. That also makes it very difficult to overly hyperextend or hyperflex. You'll see people do all kinds of things with their spine with the imaginary ball of air. Okay, so here's where we're going to go. Bend both knees, stand on the feet. And could you put your right hand under your head? We'll do this classic old version. Left hand on your right knee. And now slowly draw the elbow and knee towards each other. And feel, what do you actually do? And you'll feel that if you bulge your stomach forwards completely, right, if you push out, it'll get in the way. That you limit how far the excursion can be between your ribs and your pelvis. Or, if you decide, next time I do it, I'll pull in. I'll pull my navel towards my spine. As if hollowing the stomach. You'll feel that, in fact, then your muscles, your flexors, are occupied, as if preoccupied, with pulling in towards the spine. Again, it's the elbow going towards the knee, with the head supported. And then try this, if you will, we're calling it a third idea, but it's actually the primary idea, which is that everything in your center of gravity moves down, straight down.
Into the floor?
No, down in reference to your body.
Into the floor of your pelvis.
Into, if anywhere, into the pelvic floor. So, right, what's happening here is in the dynamics of the movement, because your hand needs to be more supportive of your head. Go ahead, really support your... And this action is the first action in that entire series. And then you go this way to take your elbow to your knee. Otherwise, you're swinging out here. And so you're actually engaging lateral muscles on one side, too much. Now, if that were the intended action, then that's a good idea, but otherwise it's too... So the purpose of this is just to feel how in a simple movement that everyone has done and many of you have taught, what's the requirements that would be most useful, the functions that would be most useful. Change sides, see if you can feel it on the other side. So that the ribs move down towards the pelvis. So how far do you go in the movement? Everyone's exploring this very nicely. So there's different steps in it, right? The elbow goes forwards, the head picks up, and then the chest moves down, or if you will, the ribs move closer to the pelvis. Okay, pause. So how are we doing? I'm trying to watch everybody's bellies as best as I can over their knees. How's it going?
Question?
Still?
It's harder to feel that in this vision and just connecting my head. I lost some of that feeling.
You lost some of the feeling of the waistline expanding when you did the elbow to the knees. Yeah. Well, it's harder to keep the feeling in application. That's why. So let's try this. Bend both knees. Interlace your fingers. Place it behind your head. This is perhaps the most obvious example. So draw both elbows and both knees towards each other. And stay there. It can be a comfortable distance. It doesn't have to be full on, but stay there. Now, in this case, the rectus abdominis really has to pull hard. But is there also a feeling that your back is going back to the floor? So one thing to do is while you're there is take a deep breath. Try it in the nose, in the front, and then in the back. Front of the nose, back of the nostrils. Then you'll feel right away a different use of the abdominal wall. And is there room, if you will, in your lower ribs and belly wall and waist for breathing to take place? So that you could do it without necessarily raising and lowering your head. I mean, you might raise and lower it a little bit. But it's primarily an action of everything from the pelvic floor up through the lower ribs. Which again means you'll have to go out. The ribs will open to the sides wide. How are we doing? So could you come to standing? Just to standing. Let's just have someone sit on the chair. Could somebody sit on the chair? Everybody can get a chance to do this, and you'll feel this. Anybody. There he is. And sit, you're prepared to stand up. So you're going to sit, but you're as if you're very attentive to something. It couldn't possibly be this, but So everything's very angular. And in order to stand up, he has several options, right? I mean, Darius could just flex here, right? In fact, pull down a little bit with the rectus abdominis, primarily just release the extensors back here. That's one way. And people do that all the time, right? To get their weight far enough forwards. The other way would be to, in fact, keep the back in a state in which it's extending so that he continues to erect himself. Here, 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 his hip joints bent, he just keeps doing it. Yeah? And then he could sit down the same way, by bending at the hips. It primarily requires bending at the hips. Right? And so that's, now in that movement, in order to do that, you have to use certain muscles to come forwards. So you can highlight what those muscles are by simply saying to the person, I'm coming in at about this angle, yeah, the force vectors are like so. So, Darius, all I'd like you to do, if you could, is just stay there and I'll push against you a slight amount, but just think, you don't want to move. You're going to stay there. And right now, even with this amount of pressure, you probably can feel those muscles working.
Yes.
On the sides, the lateral, the transverse muscles,
Yes.
and everything we've talked about. Yes?
Yes.
So now I'm going to release the pressure, reduce it, and now there. And let's do it again. So I'm using the backs of my hands, right? It's very soft pressure. Come in, there. And not very hard. If you push hard, the person's just going to feel a sense of tightening everything, and it's kind of overwhelming, and what am I doing? So it has to be very easy, very light. Enough that you get a sense that they have to do something to remain there, and that they feel what they're doing. This is probably the fastest way for people to feel their trunk stabilizers. And now, I'll go with you, I'll move with you. But could you come forwards to stand up? There we are. So they feel a little bit of, that's right, and that's enough, and come back again. And now feel, when you come back, I'm going to keep the pressure there. So you'll have to control how you come back. That's it. And this is hard to do, right? And the person has the eccentric phase of all of their abdominal stabilizers. So they go concentrically, and then let's go back. Whoa, great. And now come to standing and feel how, great. So your intention is that they can find all of those central control mechanisms. Find out, for example, he didn't bulge his abdominal wall out or hollow it. So that the person can feel that in the vertical and feel how they use that in the vertical for fairly ordinary activities. Come standing again. And see, does that work? Meaning, was that enough that you have a better sense of how to use it standing?
That's enough.
What does it
Enough
feel
for me
like there?
to feel it.
It was enough for you too. Yeah.
What does it feel? How does it feel different?
Definitely, I felt that I have to kind of lay my body into this chair, really from the base, like there. It was another option for it. I don't know what to do else.
What else to do? Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to do anything else if your force vectors come from higher to lower. Yeah. If you come from here, a person will still try to engage their rectus abdominis, or they can. But yes, this doesn't leave a lot of options. It's kind of like a constraint in any lesson. Mm-hmm. So that's one way to do it. Half of you just sit in a chair. You can go over to a partner. And could you sit in the chair as if you're about to rise? Your intention is to stand up, right? You're going to rise. You've got to go now. Oh. Useful, right here. Sit here. Sit here. So pick a partner. And the person's, they're thinking about standing, basically, right? So they're sitting not back in the chair. You stand in front of them. Put your hands just below their clavicles, upper ribs. Again, it's a force vector that's coming like so. So it goes into their center. You see the idea that it goes down and in, and you can't miss their center. It's an old Chinese exercise. So now, I'm going to move forwards, but look, I'm not pushing with my arms. I'm doing what you were just doing on the chair. I'm actually pushing from here. So, and Fred, all you have to do is stay there. Now there's, you feel it now?
I was going to say, I'm doing the same thing. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm pushing from,
Yeah.
I'm stabilizing from here.
That's it. So that's all you need to do is get the person to feel it. You don't want to push too hard because again it can overwhelm the amount of force they have to use. And now, come to standing against, there, just start to come, there we go, good. And now come back again, but wait, I'm going to keep the pressure steady. It's kind of like the tango. And go forwards. There we go. And then back again. That's it. And then stay there. Great. And then come to standing. Now you'll know, because the person in the chair could just give you direct feedback. High. You don't want it to go too high, like on the shoulders. Can you feel the waistline? Can you feel yourself here? Wide, well, it's widening and coming forwards. Yeah, there. You're doing it.
I can't tell whether the muscles are getting closer to the spine or...
That's not important, but look, move forwards as if you're going to stand. Just move a little bit, a few degrees. I'll keep resisting it the same amount. That's it. Good enough. And now let's go backwards. Whoa! It is that eccentric phase as I go forwards. And backwards. Yeah, your arms are almost as if you're leaning on a chair. There, do you feel, is that more clear? How about right
I'm
now?
actually very aware of the differences between the left and right now. Far more shortening on the left. Right.
Well, if you feel those differences, that means you feel
It's
it.
engaging.
If you want to, once again, just put your hands on the chair, you'll find that it'll have much more richness to it. Now, here's something that you can do that's an interesting thing. And I don't want to throw people off course with this, but if you keep your hands on the middle of the chair, right, braced on the middle of the chair, on the edges, so you're wrapped around the edges, but the middle of the outside. Sorry. Good, Robbie. You took it literally, as it should be. But wrapped around the outside, but midway between the front and the back. Now, go ahead and push down through your stabilized arms, your straight arms, a little bit. Don't push so hard. It's to feel the difference between nothing but your passive weight, if you will, through your arms, and then activating the push down at roughly the same angle at the hips that you were in sitting. So there's a difference. Now, using the advantage of wrapping yourself around the middle of the chair, could you shift so that you can lift your chair slightly? Think of lifting it. You don't even have to lift it. Just the idea that you're going to lift it up. And you'll feel another set of muscle fibers in exactly the same area in the core of the body enacting right away. That means you'll have to be standing far enough back on your feet. Right? And you could alternate. You could push down a little bit.
So we are allowed to shift it, are we?
You don't need to.
We don't need to.
If you're really standing with your feet close enough to the chair to push down in the way that I was suggesting, then you'll also be in about the right position to pick up. And in either situation, you're engaging core muscles, which of course don't only flex you at the hips. It's how we protect, ideally, how we protect our back picking up almost anything. Just lifting something. Actually, this part, in a much more difficult part, is in an Alexandrian eye lesson, which I don't think I did in Italy because it looked like it'd be too difficult. No, I meant in Italy just a few weeks ago. So the idea isn't that this is the ideal way to pick something up, but it's a way to find muscle groups and activate muscle groups from the beginning of the lift that would best protect your lower back and support and stabilize your spine. Slowly. And then think, not that you're going to lift the chair, but you're going to reduce. Think not of lifting the chair, but of reducing the weight of the chair on the floor. How's that? And so that you feel the initiation of it. Because that's the important part, is the initiation of it. Yeah, but see, that's even too much. Yeah, just think of reducing the weight of the chair on the floor, like you had a scale underneath the chair. And rather than lifting the chair, think that you're just simply going to reduce the weight, 50%. So that what you avoid by doing that is the flexion here. Now, if you stood, you're standing a little too close. Maybe if you stood, yeah, a little further. You have a long spine, so that your spine can be more or less level, and then let your head be level, and just like think that something's flat on a board is here or something, yeah, or a roller. How's that? That's it. There. Good. Now, think of reducing the weight of the system of the chair on the floor and your arms. Like there's a scale, and let's say it reads 20 pounds, 30 pounds, whatever. Think of reducing it to 10 pounds. That's it. And then let it back. Now you're going back and forth primarily. So think if you reduced going back and forth, how would you do it? So if I didn't let you go back, that became a constraint. How would you reduce the weight in the chair? See, the urge is either to flex or to shift the weight back. Well, it's in here, but don't flex the spine so much. Think it's this similar movement to, it's a similar movement to just going straight back when you were sitting in the chair. In fact, it's not even similar. It's kind of the same movement. We could see things. There's a lot of air in the room, huh? You notice that? A lot of kind of presses into your nose and mouth. Hard to keep it out. These chairs are not so great for this purpose, but if you, I can show you what, and part of the end of actually. So another way of doing this was to keep the heels together. There's several ways to go down from this side of the chair, yeah, and then because you wouldn't have this brace here, you'd have a straight chair, yeah. But we'll have to do it with a brace because. So you put your elbows against the top of the chair. This chair's too small, obviously, right? It takes a little bit bigger chair. But the basic idea is that you would lift it up like this and set it down like this. And what you could do is use your elbows to kind of pry the chair so that you lifted it like this finally, and you aimed the chair forwards, and then you went this way, right? And that's actually the conclusion of one of the lessons, preceded by doing that as you go down. So for those who were just recently went through a rather extended version of this, that was one of the things we didn't do, because I think.
Frank, could you show us the other version?
Facing the chair?
Yeah. I just want to get you doing it.
Okay. So
If you can.
let me do different versions so that you can see clearly and get where you could see my spine from the side. I think that would be the easiest thing. So here's a basic habit. It's to push down and flex. Can you see the flexion? It could start this way. And just be a little bit in the spine, but mostly in the head. Or it could start way down so that all of the core muscle groups are actually involved in flexing the pelvis. Or it could be this, which we talked about a little before. Or it could be that you stay more or less straight and you actually lengthen your spine. Yeah? That your spine simply gets longer. The distance between the tailbone and the head just simply is longer as you engage the muscles, which would be the same thing. Disengaged muscles, engaged. That would be the same. And so, another tendency is to rock back, right? Change the angle of the shoulders, or even to rock forwards. So you just stay there, and you just go down enough to feel, that's, okay, there's a length in the spine. That's the same movement if we just flipped it around. It's about the same hip angle as doing this, right? It's virtually the same requirement, except gravity's going through in a different direction, right? So that you would go so far, and maybe you don't need to go that much farther to get over your heels, maybe you do, it depends. Yeah? And then sitting down would be, the same thing. It's like, there we are. That's the greatest constraint. And then, there you are. So that the angle of inclination is about so much at the maximum. Does that make sense? So you're neither pulling in your belly or pushing out your belly. You're doing kind of both, but you're really getting in here. And kind of wraparound stability. So I have an idea. Rashida, could you come over here? And could you stand at my back and put we have this a little bit in the way, but there we are. Put your fingers here and your thumbs a little lower, so like you're trying to hold my waist. Let me get my belt a little lower. There we are. Okay. Now look, just feel this. That's it. And you could squeeze a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what it feels like.
That expansion on the side.
It goes that way, right?
Yeah.
And a little bit back, but it's also here. So that's different than this, which is sucking the navel back to the spine and has no diaphragmatic excursion and contributes a little bit to the contraction of the rectus abdominis. It makes it really difficult. Yeah? So that's the idea of the ball going down, yeah? And going out on all sides.
Compared to mine, which is really flat. On the right
I think
place.
yeah. Now, one difficulty with this, it has to be independent of your breathing. So you can do the movement, and actually keep it there if you wanted to for several minutes.
Yeah.
You could do that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, Ellen's got it.
Oh, I'm so proud.
No, you can see that you're doing it. You're still breathing. You haven't fainted. Okay. So here we are where we ended yesterday, day 2. So So yeah, so you can, this is a good shot because you can see the exposed pulp and then the connective tissue that lays over it. And you can feel the midline because it's a line. And here it's pretty clear how that line is formed. So the connective tissue, when two sheets of connective tissue come together, they often wrap around each other and form a cord. So you have a midline right from the center of your pubic bone right up to the tip of your xiphoid process. All of which I don't know if we actually did. No, we didn't find the pubic bone yesterday, but we went up to the xiphoid process. So if you go right over the middle of someone, like so, you know, like, then you'll be snapping a little stringy thing, and that's the linea alba. Which does a good job of missing your navel by wrapping around it. And this is back here, this layer of muscles coming out that you can see in these transverse cuts here, these side cuts. Those are layers of the obliques and transversalis coming around from your back. And that's where we had our fingers when we were pinching ourselves. Yeah. So you were, in a sense, pulling that back and trying to feel the reaction of all those muscles.
Now, all these muscles, Frank, their attachment to the ribs and to the pubic bone and xiphoid process and all of that, they attach directly muscle fibers or ligamentous fibers because they're not tendon. It's not a tendon.
No, they're connected. They weave into connective tissue and form sheets of connective tissue, which you can see best in some ways. Well, you can see that, like when it's cut away here, right, the connective tissue, right, when it's peeled back. But if you look at it, this is the inside one. Yeah, the interior view. So this is standing inside, looking out. I like those kinds of. So you see the idea of the diaphragm being a dome. Do you want me to turn this a little bit? Or? And this is an important illustration. Sorry, need more coffee. This is the rectus abdominis. This would be a transverse cut, right? Just right at two different points. And so there's one side and the other side. So here's where we were working yesterday with our fingers, right? Where we were going that way, right? And then we were going that way on the other side of the body. The thing I was doing at the end that we were doing with Rosa, and then you practiced. Then you can see the muscle pulp from the obliques and from the transversalis. And those three muscle groups are separated by their own connective tissue. And look how it wraps in. See how these things are all held together. So the white line here, right, that's part of the connective tissue of separating these two is part of the linea alba, the midline.
So the white line is...
Well, here's, you see this, like right here?
Uh-huh.
That goes right down the middle of the abdominal wall. And again, that's the linea alba, these sides here, left and right here.
But I don't see a white line, I'm sorry. Where is the white line?
Just flip the page so you can see.
It's kind of a blue-gray.
So here, it's represented
Okay.
in that position, but this is a transverse section. Sometimes it's good to get those different perspectives to really understand, because you can't really see how it's laid out until you do transverse cuts. So when you're talking about layers of the abdominal wall, this would be layer one, right? And then your external obliques that go over the cartilage of your ribs a little bit, right, with connective tissue, right? Just connective tissue, not lines like a tendon, yeah? That's layer two. And then inside of the ribs, you have layer three, and that's your internal obliques. And the internal and external obliques are at 90 degree, the fibers are at 90 degree angles to each other, which means they're at 45 degree angles to the rectus abdominis. That's pretty interesting, right? So you got a vertical line, you've got an oblique line going this way, and an oblique line going this way. And then this one, the deepest layer, the transverse, is a muscle that goes, if you will, at a 45 degree angle to this one. So that's a straight line, more or less. It's horizontal. So the rectus abdominis is vertical. The transversalis back here is horizontal. And then you have internal and external obliques going at 45-degree angles to each of them and 90-degree angles to each other.
So the joint at the front of the linea alba, at the back, what happens?
So at the which joint? You have
Each layer is going to...
so how I look at the construction of all of this is that the joints don't really move that much. They move usually for the purposes of respiration, or they're pulled on by multitudes of muscles like the rectus femoris, or now the obliques you activate more, right? Different parts of it. Now the transversalis more, right? So you're doing it that way. I think of it more like if you go to the evolutionary function, that this is all designed and built and can't be comprehended in terms of movement of the skeletal structure that well. It can be understood in terms of the need to exert pressures against gases and liquids so that you can survive. And so
my comment or my question is really related to the stuff we were doing with Alan yesterday, and the internal pressures and the external
Right.
bracing. And if you want to think, I mean, we're really looking at this, how everything connects to the front. In fact, it all connects all the way around. So we have this, when we were putting our hands front and back and we were expanding and changing.
well, the idea of the ball going up and down inside you,
Yes.
if that's what you're referring to. But then we need that back. There was a lovely rear view. Well, here's the sort of front of the rear. There must be a back of the
There
rear.
is a back in there, but we'll find out.
Just to see all the connecting. You don't have much muscle pulp in your lower back, and a lot of people don't realize that. There's not that much muscle pulp there. It's connective tissue. So when these muscles over here that you had your thumbs and fingers on, whichever way you would do it, yeah, right towards your spine is mostly sheets of connective tissue. So as you see all of the muscle pulp here in this cut sort of disappearing, but yet you have the connective tissue that runs between each of these cells and in between each of the sheets that or envelopes that hold the muscles together individually, contain them, yeah, and define them. Well, that's what's left, connective tissue. And that connects you from one side to the other, even though you have a midline. So that you can take like your parts of your external obliques going at a 45-degree angle here, part of the transverse muscles here, and then another part of the internal obliques here. And everything you can do movements that cross the midline. I mean, it's a radical idea that you could do movements that cross the midline.
Even though the muscles themselves don't cross the middle.
Yeah, there are no muscles in your body that cross the midline. But yet we expect to be able to rotate things. We expect to be able to do things like this. But as you see, we're not actually well designed for it. If you really look at the midline here, if I really don't move my scapula much, and I really don't adjust my trunk much, right? If I really decide, okay, I'm going to constrain the movements of the trunk, you can't really cross your midline very well. Only at certain heights, and not even, look, even there. It's just, so we're not really that well built for it, even in our shoulder girdles. So what we expect is, in the world of action, that you're going to be able to bring an arm across, move over, and like hand a drink to Darius. But you can do it because you're doing this. You're using some of the abdominal wall and the psoas muscle and the back muscles, many muscle groups, to be able to perform actions of crossing the midline. The actions, again, define how you can organize your muscles, because the actions always include the brain. Right? The actions mean there's an intention, there's an environment, you're relating your movement to the environment. And once you go into like, what do the muscles do? Well, actually, the muscles are kind of dumb in a certain way. They just do, in a sense, what we intend that they do as best as they can do it. And sometimes it's not that well, anyway. But we have to be able to know clearly, I'm going to move over here and shake hands with you. Like, what an idea to cross way over beyond the other side of my body to shake hands with you. It feels ordinary, but actually, look, I won't move my pelvis. I won't use these muscles to elevate the hip. The muscles we're talking about, like the transversalis, and then back in here, muscles on the ribs that you can see. Where did they go? We had that internal. So you see this big thing? That should be the quadratus lumborum, yes. And so muscles like that as well as the psoas muscle, right? All of that. Look at the size of those things. So all of that is being integrated with these cutaways of the obliques and the transversalis, right? Which are wrapping around. So you have this back wall, this front wall, a spine and back, a strong cord, not a line, but a cord of connective tissue in front. That's the linea alba. Yeah. And then you're using all of this just to go. First thing is to shake Darius. Look how silly it would look if I tried to shake Darius' hand without using this. I mean, you know. So you'd say it's a half-hearted attempt at best. So actually, the key thing to do, and of course you all know this because you're all Feldenkrais practitioners, but it's worth repeating. So what you actually have to do is orient yourself, bring your pelvis up, your ribs up. Look at that. So therefore, those movements, if you thought of it, an FI, those kinds of movements, these kinds of movements, rotatory movements, and now actually, what I'm doing is sticking my hand out in front of me. Right? If I just took this all back again in the same relationship, I haven't crossed the midline. But most people don't see that. They're overwhelmed by distal movement. You see, they see distal movement, and the hand is going so far. But actually, almost everyone's going to go like so. If you were in another position, let's draw something where it might be easier to see. I think it's easier to see it here. Then it becomes even more apparent, right? Because now you don't confuse as much elevation and depression of the hip or the use of muscles like the quadratus lumborum, right? So but you're still going basically on the way up. You're turning, right? And now I'm flexing a little bit also to get a little closer. And yet, look where I really am. It hasn't really changed from just the most ordinary place. So the idea of looking at distal musculature and distal actions in terms of in proximal to distal relationships, it's really critical to see the trunk, to see how a person uses their trunk, even if all the stuff going on seems to be out there, at the connections. Now, there's just one thing I want to finish because I got distracted and then lost this. The evolutionary purpose of this, and I don't know if this is tied to what you were asking originally or not, but where I wanted to go was that the pressures in the abdominal wall are actually the central feature of all of these muscles. These muscles are the muscles that reach up from your legs and hips and go into your body cavities. They penetrate your body cavities. As I talked about this on the weekend, and we talked about it in one training or another, that the muscles of your shoulder girdle cover your rib cage. They sit on top of you and they surround you. You have no muscles that penetrate your chest cavity from your shoulders. Right? So your shoulder girdle sits as a structure on it, as a yoke. You have big muscle groups and little muscle groups all over, but they don't go inside of you. The muscles of the hips and the muscles that mobilize the legs, on the other hand, almost all of them do. They either go under the inguinal ligament, they go inside the pelvis, deep inside the pelvis, and reach out for your trochanters. Sorry. So they're completely different in the way that their relationship exists in terms of the internal and external dynamics. You're right, that part of getting it with the belt. Yeah.
Which muscles are you using now?
So if you look at all of this in the connective tissue in the back, which we'll take a look at later, and all the muscles here wrapping around, this is a good shot because you can get a sense of it reaching out and wrapping around. So what that's for in the evolution of the structure, you can tell is primarily not to move you, or it's to propel you from the rear. So there's nothing in the anatomy of the human body that would suggest that you're designed to be propelled with your arms in any way. Yeah? But because this is so far up inside of you, virtually everything you're doing in there is going to move your legs. So otherwise, this serves the back surface. This is the side surfaces that you're seeing. That wraps around too. Actually, we should show the whole... Yeah, okay, that's pretty good. That's the one that goes, that's the rectus abdominis going all the way down. And So then they wrap around, right, what we saw the cutaways of, that wraps around to the front surfaces, and that's the layer of connective tissues on top of it. So that what you have there is the ability to do what we talked of in the evolution of motion is the critical thing that this is designed for. And that's to be able to, when you have to go, right? And that's a primary action. And without seeing where the bones go and how they operate, it's really, I think, difficult to understand breathing. So the critical things to do with these muscles would be to go, or, which is different, right? We've explored this once in an ATM and everyone's training, so I don't want to take time today to do that. But the other thing would be to be able to organize, along with the deep core organs, the peristaltic motions of the intestines and the rectum and colon, so that you can defecate. Because if you couldn't do that, eventually you'd have some really serious problems and you'd die. But those things are coordinated with the muscle wall right here. Even though that's like so deep inside and all of that, at the same time, it's not that hard to get your fingers on all of it and go right to the spine. So we need to have a good organ shot here. Let's see, there's a good organ shot. There's blood vessels, there's a kidney sitting back there. There's some that have really good, you see how the diaphragm is integrated into all of this? I mean, look at the design. It's just, look at the it's higher on one side, sweeps down, and then look at this triangulation that's made with the inguinal ligament going over to the pubic bone. It's incredible. Ah, there we go. So then you have connective tissues coming here, which a lot of people will just call fat. Well, actually, it's good to have fat in your organs. If you don't have fat in your organs, you're less protected. Or you have to be in a state of high readiness at all times, which is kind of a drag. Mm-hmm. So the ability to exert pressure so that you can cough and sneeze, but also so that you can control in time the superficial muscles that we were just looking at with the deep peristaltic movements of the intestines is critical. Nobody just moves their intestines. I mean, just, you know, if they're healthy, I mean, just watch an animal taking a crap. You know, it's pretty obvious that they flex a lot and they start to do things with their belly, and it's all contributing to the exertion of pressures. Stomach muscles have to contract generally for the bladder to release. So there's a timing between sphincter muscles at the bladder to time itself with slight exertions of subtle pressures of the lower abdominal wall against the bladder. It's a coordination. It's a coordination. And if any of you have been through surgery, major surgery, then you have that coordination is something that you can lose, meaning temporarily. You know, you post anesthesia, people lose it. So that's why very often they'll catheterize a patient for a surgery. It's not because they're going to lose it forever, or that the surgery's about them not being able to urinate, let's say, but they might not have the coordinative control of superficial muscles able to press on the bladder and open the sphincter at the same time, relax the sphincter at the same time. You know, we don't think of that as a coordination, but it is. And again, one of which, if you lose for a while, could be life-threatening. So those are the things, because they're life-threatening, meaning how soon could you die now? You could sort of go with your orifices and the pressures against gases and liquids according to how fast would you die if you couldn't do which. Probably coughing would rate number one. Being able to get something out of your trachea would be the most critical thing. And then second might be get something out of your nose, out of that went deep up inside your nose, because you could choke on that too. And so those would be the primary things that the pressures are for. And then excretion. Then there's another thing that these are for, and the use of them is related to the birth of all people, right? So it's like going into the next generation use. It's like the core, the next generation, and all the muscle work, the fantastic amount of stretching of muscles, And the idea of a uterus expanding to that size and all the muscles having to be coordinated is, again, they sometimes don't get coordinated that well to be able to support the placenta and the baby inside, and then control all the muscles of the back. It's not just in front, right? It's exactly what we were doing yesterday, right? Trying to push a baby out the birth canal, out the vagina by pushing that way is really unworkable. And so one of the things that's taught in some of the early Lamas is how to do things similar to what we were doing. How to push down, truly down, as opposed to the habit of pushing forwards. So, and that's also partly why people have talked about the use of the abdominal wall in different positions. And what did some people do at one time before they had Lamas classes? So, here. So if you're in this position, you've now effectively eliminated the possibility of pushing your abdominal wall forwards, right? In fact, you were here. I mean, I don't know if any of you could, I can't really, you can do it. And there's a pressure one could exert forwards, but it's very limited. So most of the pressures will open up the perineum, right? Like almost everything like this will open up the perineum. The ball goes down the middle. And that's how most of the world, until fairly recently, simply defecated. I mean, it was just like the easiest way to do it and the best way to control the movements of we'll just call them core muscle structures, and coordinate it with movements of intestines and to coordinate it with the massive and powerful movements of childbirth. So this is what the area is really for. And then there's that issue of how do you take all of that, how do you take this character and then move them around? And then you have the muscles that go up into your core from the pelvis, your strong flexors, which as you see, your strong flexors are really back here. So the idea of touching the spine or touching the psoas muscle, you know, is that in back or in front? It's hard to find things and sense things if you're not sure what might be there, you know. So I think it's important that we take some time and look at this stuff. That's a beautiful shot. Look at, people commented upon my running my hands over the bones during the workshop. The flow of force, the flow of force through the lower back and into the pelvis, and how it gets to the hip joint. All the curvature involved, and look at the curvature of the muscles. I mean, the psoas muscle is wow. Look at that. Years ago, there was this guy, Paul Shepard, I guess his name was, Paul Shepard, who was a writer and an anatomist. He wrote a book on called The Tender Carnivore and the Sacred Game. And he's the one who realized, as they were constructing and deconstructing languages of primitive tribes and languages that were getting lost, he was the one that helped develop computer programs in the early years of computers. I mean, you didn't have laptops yet and stuff. In the early years of giant calculators, to figure out that actually the language, the words that were being used to describe interior structures of the body and organs of the body, and just all of these relationships were almost identical to what they were using to describe constellations in the sky, because they didn't have our mythology, so they didn't have our constellations. So what they had was, as you knew that it was life you were killing to be able to eat. So this tender carnivore, as he put humans, then had the sacred game. And you dissected them very effectively, and you took out specific parts of the animal that had specific names, and these things were sacred because you could eat them and live. And this was then related to the night sky, too. You know, it would almost be like saying, "Oh yeah, you see that kidney up there? Yeah, look at that great heart over there." I mean, what an idea. But it's an idea that apparently was thought of by dozens upon dozens of tribal people in different parts of the globe long ago. Things are a little more indiscriminate than that now. But this was all when the population of the world was very small and everyone lived in tribes and they were hunting, gathering people. So, different life. And not only that, from what I've read about it all, they have really lousy delis and bad restaurants. Yeah. The stuff everybody hates but needs.
What is that?
Fat serves not just the purpose of having an insulation layer, but it's also a connective tissue. Fatty connective tissues help to sort of fill in spaces in here. If you look at all the spacing in there, well, this stuff goes down and sits inside and contours to your intestines and organs, and it fills it in quite nicely, and again helps protect it, insulate it, and gives it a kind of, otherwise you'd have this rather huge lumpy shape pressing against your muscles, so it evens it out. You could consider this fat aesthetically essential. This is all so utterly labial. I mean, this is a connective tissue that springs out from the spine, starts to reach out. It's like being cut off in the act of springing, and then all the organs there, you're seeing how they're connected to the back connective tissue to the back of the spine. The front of the spine, to the front of the spinal wall. So when I was talking early in the day yesterday about your organs being critical to think of in terms of your posture and the placement of them and the electrical excitability that goes through here, a lot of people go, well, here's the difference between muscles and connective tissue. This is an old-fashioned idea. I don't think anyone seriously thinks this anymore, but this was how anatomy used to be taught. So you can take an electrode and go zip, and the muscle will twitch, right? And you can twitch, and the connective tissue doesn't do that. Meaning if you put an electrode against a tendon, you might not get any result in motion. And so connective tissue is considered neutral. But actually there's a lot of electrical excitation through connective tissue, and it conducts very well. It doesn't happen to shorten and lengthen in the direction of a muscle fiber. So it doesn't participate in its own excitability in the same way, yeah? By going from one end to the other head and going shorter, longer, right? It's more enmassed. It can pull into itself. It can crinkle and decrinkle. It can do what you see people do with a lot of their bodies when they're having different kinds of reactions. You can watch it on sports. Everything crinkles up, right? So, and then tremendous expansion, right? So all that connective tissue that people sort of think of as passive and too hard, or a very stiff part of the body, is actually quite excitable and just has its own properties of excitement. Not to mention the excitability of the organs. I mean, everybody who could be human and not have gone, oh boy, did that make my heart jump, or oh, did I feel that went right to my stomach when you said such and such. So sometimes happens in feedback from practicums. Oh, when you told me such and such, it went right to my, and then after that I got a headache. And so people will often have organ descriptions about things that they've seen on television or that are kindled based on events of people close to them, of course.
Is that actually happening in the organ, or is that just us?
Yes. Yeah, it's happening to the organ. The organ has its own pulsations, its own rhythms of contracting and expanding, and the connective tissue that's organizing all of the organs separately into envelopes. You know, like the liver is surrounded by connective tissue. Your heart, you can't see your heart, like you can't see it. When you're dissecting, there's so much dense, sort of white-gray fiber around it called the pericardium. It's around the heart. And pericardial connective tissue is very, very dense and extremely hard to cut through. So, and that's sitting on connective tissues that are attached to your diaphragm. So your breathing and your pericardium and heart are interacting constantly. Your breathing is pushing down all this stuff. It's just pushing it down and pulling it back up again because it's attached to connective tissues. Yeah. The most obvious thing when people, unless you think in particular situations like childbirth, which is obvious, where tremendous expansion, enormous excitatory pulsations have to mobilize the organs, the connective tissues, the superficial muscles, the deep muscles, everything, right?
And then the
pelvic
bones
floor,
separate,
the
don't
bones
they?
separate, yes, yes. The pubic symphysis dissolves, and the sacroiliac joints, how would I show this for the skeleton anyway? The sacroiliac joints bevel back, yeah, to such a point that on some women, apparently what you feel back here is your posterior superior iliac crust, your PSIS, comes almost to the point of touching. Wow. And the reason for that isn't to open the front of the pelvis, it's to space out a larger distance between the sitting bones. Because that's the final limitation to the size of the skull, is the sitting bones. So it's not just so the pubic symphysis is a very inventive way, if you will, right, to just dissolve the cartilage. It's rebuilt again in about 2 weeks, so.
Is that a progressive thing that goes on from the beginning of
No.
the inception of pregnancy, or just
No.
that jump?
Very quickly towards the end.
Towards the end?
And sometimes things aren't timed well. Sometimes hormones don't dissolve it fast enough, but the other contractions are taking place for labor, right? And all of a sudden, there's all this pressure. And it's not just liquids, gases, and solids. It's like there's another whole person in there. And all of that pressure is going down, but the bone hasn't dissolved enough. So the joint can't move back far enough
So
and
that's when they do the
separate.
episiotomy or
Sorry.
something? That's when they do the...
No, they might do a C-section, yes.
Uh-huh.
No, an episiotomy is done to avoid the tearing of the vaginal sphincter. Where's the? I mean, the sexual organs. Stasi removed them from his book so that nobody in here would do. But the sexual organs are the most obvious when people think of rhythmicities, pulsations, expansions and contractions of tissues in reaction to thought, feelings, stimulation in the environment. The genitals are as obvious, if not more, than the heart.
And are they really not included in this book?
I just can't. They're, which one?
They're there.
This one? So I have all of this stuff on slides, which I didn't think we'd need that much anatomy, but I used to photograph a lot of books and then put them into a slideshow. And years ago when I taught anatomy, we'd have 2 slides going at once so you could make comparisons between this and that, And sometimes the comparisons were not just between body parts or shots like this, but they'd be between things in nature that you'd find, like seashells, and then the bones of the inner ear, so that people could get the idea where the unity really lies and how things really formed. But one of the most dramatic shots was this one, and then the inside, a transverse shot through the inside of the throat. And people would come in and look at the 2 slides and go, and it takes a little while. And then finally people figure out which is which. Because you're really at the top and the bottom of the trunk, right? You're at the roof and you're at the floor. But I mean, these are structures that swell and shrink constantly with various needs outside of what you would call primary survival needs, right? This is looking inside down. So when I say send the ball down, right, that's you're going down, descending in that direction there, and ultimately, that's one location for it all to end up. Some cultures, the control of these muscles is considered really important. I mean, you can imagine every time you're breathing, the contents go down, and what if there's no response at the floor? That's not too different than if somebody's breathing and they lift something up and they go and contract the throat. Close it off in the same way. So shut the roof. One thing that we should know is whether or not the pelvic floor moves when you breathe. So the implication of what I was saying before, when you take a breath with your diaphragm, is this should be moving. it doesn't move a lot, and it doesn't need to move a lot. It's a tone change. It's more support, or is it going to be fixated so that if anything moves down, it can't go really down. The ball can't go down. It has to go forwards because there's the feedback is there's a sense of solidity from the pelvic floor. There's no yielding actions. Or does it yield and respond to the breath enough that that feeling of it going straight down is available? And states of the rhythmicity of the genital organs aren't as usually as obvious as the rhythmicity of our organs, like our heart, or our breath, or the swelling and shrinking of our liver. You know, all of our glands change their functionality all the time. Any of you, if you just get regular blood tests and they say, okay, we're going to give you a physical, get a battery of tests for your thyroid gland and your, everything, liver function battery, those kinds of things. Well, there's a real problem with this. It would depend on which day in what time even of a day did you get those tests. So some doctors now will go, I know this really doesn't fit in with our model of containing medical costs, but really the thing to do if you want to know how any organ is functioning is go get a test one day in the morning, 2 days later in the evening, another day in the middle of the afternoon, and then you compare the three and look for the differences. And there's fluctuation patterns in virtually everything that would be tested. So that's why there's also a tendency to dismiss a test and go, well, it's normal. It's somewhere in the middle, knowing that you're going to fluctuate, but it probably won't bring you over or under the marker. Well, okay, from your coccyx here, you have many ligaments that go back up to the sacrum and out and into support for the muscle walls coming in and for the pelvic floor. And a lot of people, if they've curved their coccyx under, maybe they had a bad fall on a stairway, or when they were a kid they were ice skating and fell flat on it, that kind of thing. And it hadn't bothered them that much except for the big owie at the time. But then years later, as they're learning new movements, they're taking up new activities, they start to get pains. And sometimes don't realize that if they crack their sacrum, which can also happen, it might heal and heal a little bit off center. It doesn't quite heal in the same line. So there's little stresses set into all of the ligaments, and then by use or bad use perhaps, all of the muscles that are attached to all of that. And so people have back problems that are mistakenly identified as discogenic and stuff like that, because it's so easy to take an x-ray and go, oh, your disc looks a little bit off there. I think you have a prolapsed piece of tissue right there. And then that's the end of it, right? It's like, okay, that's what's wrong with me. It's my prolapsed herniated disc. And actually, it could be layers of things further down from there. The nerves that spring out of the sacrum and all of the tissues that are being pressured all the time at the bottom of the pelvic floor. This is what a lot of people don't realize about the back. Down in here, you don't have that much excitable muscle pull. You have connective tissues which are pulled upon and made very taut by the muscle. And in the forces that are exerted by the stretching of the muscles, if you bend over like this on the connective tissue, can be considerable. So you have there's two like worldview differences as to how you should pick something up. One is that you let your spine flex a lot. Let those tissues stretch a lot. This means that your tissues have to be ready for it. You have to be prepared for it. The tissues are familiar with it. So you want to pick up a chair. So there's two really different points of view. One would be, and this is the most common one taught today, you'd get close to the object, you'd try to not bend your spine too much, right? You come from your hips, this is more or less what we were talking about yesterday. You take the center of mass of the object as much as you can get close to the center of mass of the object, and you lift it up, take it this way, you lift it up and bring it to your center of mass and come up through your legs, right? And minimize the bending of the spine. If you do have to go lower, then what you do is, I'll just set it further away to imitate that. Then you take your pelvis back, bring the thing towards you, right? So it's going through space on a diagonal, and move your pelvis forwards. So that you you minimize movement in the spine. That's one point of view. Another point of view is, no, bad use of the connective tissues of the back in the elasticity, in potential energy that's stored in the elastic tissues of the spine. So to advantage the elastic tissues, bend over. Bend everything. Let your spine really bend. Pick it up. Really from here. Use your core. Pick it up from the lower abdominal wall and let the elastic nature of the spine relieve the muscles of the back and relieve the pressures on the discs. Really opposite points of view. There's much research to substantiate both. Yeah.
Weightlifters.
Weightlifters do it all that way all the time.
Oh, which way? Second way?
Heavy weightlifters.
No, which way do you do it? You do it with...
Second way. You bend your spine. You use your back. Right. Which means you're not using your back by contracting the muscles in your back. Like that the idea is not to go, get all these muscles to do everything, but to realize that over years, if you were to weightlift, regularly, the connective tissue starts to grow. The muscles are easy to develop. This is a problem of exercise. All the red stuff, the excitable pulp that slides together and goes apart, that's fast. You can double your strength very quickly. Month, 6 weeks, you can double your strength. So people do that and they go, oh, great, I'll keep doing it that well. Man, go to the gym, keep doing whatever, right? Because you've doubled your strength, you're stronger, you feel better. The problem is your connective tissue, the tendons from the muscle to the bone, the connective tissues spread throughout the muscle septums and organizing the muscles, like in your back and in your throat and in your chest and all over the abdominal wall, all those things. But let's just stick to the back. It just can't grow fast enough. It takes months to be able to strengthen enough to deal with the resiliently with the full force of the muscle pulp pulling on it. It can take up to 2 years. That's a long time. So there's this really boring period where people go through weight programs and have to basically feel like they're doing nothing. But the connective tissue is still developing, right? It's still going. So here's a point of view. If you've never done what I think, this is my own conclusion. If you haven't picked things up this way, don't. Just don't. But if you're used to it, look, if you've done, lessons where those kinds of, some of these lessons are great. Right? They're simple little, but you're lengthening things by bending in a variety of ways, right? And you're doing various kinds of movements that would cause, if you will, distress on connective tissues, but you're only using the weight of your own body, and you're not trying to stretch things. You get enough resiliency and flexibility in there that you might be better off using it. The best example is of this stored elastic potential in a muscle is the Achilles tendon. Because your calf muscles actually, and this was known quite a while ago, do not have the strength to even possibly propel you into a jump or have you run fast. They just don't have it. The reason that they can do it is because of the potential energy stored in a long Achilles tendon. So when you get at the right angle and you are about to spring off, you have a tremendous elastic whip there. I'm going to do this really quickly. Okay? So you get a real complete view of connective tissues. First of all, a connective tissue changes its chemical composition. There are many connective tissues of different types in the body. Some are let's do this as I talk. Take 2 fingers on your forearm. You can get close to your wrist. And now move the connective tissue side to side, and you'll find, of course, there's a limit. Right? You go so far, and you'll feel a limit. Your skin doesn't keep sliding forever. Don't dig deep. This is to stay on the surface. Well, that limit is determined by the connective tissue that envelopes your arm. Yeah? It wraps it up like a Christmas present in a package. And then your skin and the areolar connective tissue directly under it. It would look, you could grab it like so, gently. It's not grabbing it, but holding it. It's slide it up and down. And you'll feel what's called the sleeve of your connective tissue, because it is like a sleeve. and you'll feel that it has only so far to go. Some people have very tight connective tissue under their skin. I mean, really tight, and there's very little motion on the surface. Other people, there's a huge amount. I mean, you can pull the skin up and go, oh man, they have very loose skin, we'd say.
Have you ever touched somebody with a scar?
Yeah.
Maybe a scar.
Yeah, the scar is overhealing. All scars are overhealing to protect the area. And so that it feels denser and thicker and there's less motion available. Okay? So that's everywhere on the surface of your body. Right? Everywhere. Let's go inside before we get to that surface. So you have cerebrospinal fluids. The first cerebrospinal fluid is secreted by your brain. Right? It directly comes out of your brain. And there's a layer of connective tissue that's viscous, sticky, and sits really on top of the brain. And it goes into every convolution of the brain. It's perfectly contoured. It would be almost impossible, really, to say the brain is under it any more than you could say, well, the skin is under this or above this. It's part of it. It's part of how it holds its form and maintains its shape. So connective tissue has the job of maintaining shape in form. Okay? Just think of it that way. So it's secreted as a liquid that becomes kind of gelatinous. Then you have a layer of cerebrospinal fluid covering that up. Yeah? Then you have another layer of dense connective tissue. Then you have another layer of cerebrospinal fluid. Then inside your skull, you have another layer of connective tissue. So your brain is protected. If you hit your head, your brain is going connective tissue against a buffer of cerebrospinal fluid, buffered by connective tissue, buffered by more fluid before you would hit the brain inside the skull. Now that may sound, well, how often are you going to hit your brain inside the skull? That's how some people die in auto accidents, even with airbags. Yeah. So, that's how fast your brain could accelerate ahead of the movement of your head. And so you concuss yourself too massively. Yeah. So it's not, yeah. And oh, by the way, the closest one to your brain is called the pia mater, the little mother. Mater, pia mater.
The little mother.
Yeah. And the top one is called the dura mater, or the tough mother. Now, these layers, mostly the dura mater, at different levels, wrap back like this across your brain, go down, and take a group of neurons and group them together by forming what's called the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is filled with cerebrospinal fluid and is, in effect, an extension of your brain. Right? That goes down as a tube. Then later on, of course, we have a skeleton around it. The nerves come out. The nerves are coated with something called myelin, which is another form of connective tissue, which is a kind of an insulation over a nerve, and something that helps speed the excitability of a nerve. It maintains the form of the nerve.
The transmission, not so much the excitability, but the transmission.
The transmission, yeah. Right? Rather than just going down and out, it can go exactly where it's directed to. And create a much faster transmission. So here's a question. How do the nerves stay where they are when you're rolling around on the floor or you're stretching a muscle? How do the nerves stay there? You'd think they just fall off, or they get tangled up in each other. Or if you did a headstand, your intestines would fall up and wrap around your liver, and you'd never get out of it. Well, I used to think this when I was a little kid. I was completely paranoid of this, twisting up into opposite. I used to think, God, how come I couldn't figure out how the body parts all stayed? Why wouldn't you just rip your guts out when you stood back up? It was really, and then how do the muscles stay on? Are they stapled or glued, or how do the muscles stay where they are in spite of what you do with them? It seems like an odd thing. So the connective tissue that begins in the brain as a secretion goes down into the cerebral spinal fluid, also goes out with the nerves, and there's a coating over all of your muscles that make the muscle what it is. It makes the muscle the muscle. That's why you can individually name it. It's in an envelope of connective tissue. And so you can feel that. You were feeling that yesterday by feeling right here. Yeah? You were feeling the connective tissue on the lateral walls of the rectus abdominis. So wherever you can usually feel something that gives definition and form to the pulp of a muscle, that is connective tissue. So it's in sheets that go through the muscles, wrap them up, and particularize them and differentiate them in your body. It is the connective tissue that does that. Does that help with the picture of all this? Now a tendon. A tendon is when you take the sheet of excitable muscle and it disappears, the length of the muscle. Just take any muscle. So from here to here. And the muscles, all right, there's the muscle, so the connective, therefore there's the connective tissue that makes it a muscle. But in between, each muscle fiber is its own group of connective tissue, wrapping up the muscle fiber to maintain the form of a muscle fiber. And the direction provided direction for the force. Yeah. So a muscle might have hundreds of cells, and they're organized in long tubes. And those tubes are called muscle fibers. But what if you took out the excitable red, the meat, right? And you took that stuff out, or it disappeared, meaning that it no longer was there towards the end. The muscle ended. Well, then how does that muscle attach to the bone? Is that the connective tissue from all of the muscle fibers inside coming through to each end. And the huge outside envelope, all of that as a bundle. The muscle's going, and it becomes a tendon at each end. Yeah? So it's the other excitable stuff that does not lengthen and shorten by itself. Yeah? So when you're holding a tendon at each end of a muscle, or in Andrini, you can find, there's a tendon for your hamstrings. Oh yeah, come on, you can find it. Whoa, it's a big cord-like thing. And it's all pulp up from there. It's the connective tissue that seems so dense where you're strumming it, is now gone into layers of very thin, microscopically thin sheets of tissue separating out every muscle fiber all the way up to your sits bone. So then you have muscle fibers grouped individually. They're fibers because they have the form of a fiber because of the connective tissue that maintains the form. And then the muscle is individualized because it's maintained in a form. Even more, there's groups of bundles called fasciculi that when you get a twitch, sometimes you just have a twitch and a nerve is fired and it usually sets off a group of those muscle fibers and it's a twitch. How does it get to the bone? The bone, the chemistry changes. And the bone, all bones, are covered with periosteum, something that goes around the bone. It's a wraparound. So from your brain to the outer surfaces of your bone is, in a sense, one substance with varying chemical properties. From the liquid and gelatinous into something extremely tough, into something that covers your bone so thoroughly that when you break a bone, you wouldn't know it if you didn't displace the covering on the bone. So if you thought of, here's a bone that should be one unit. Let's say that's here. And you broke it. There are people who have gone in races and they kept on running. Right? They didn't know that the bone was broken because there was no shearing force. But when there's a little displacement, the slightest displacement, the wrapping around the bone, the periosteum, gets a little torn and it's rich in sensory fibers. And the person, of course, goes, wow. But they maybe never felt the bone break. And it might not. Some people do walk around for weeks with a broken bone and didn't realize it's already healed, but then it becomes misaligned. But anyway, most of the sensation of your bone comes at the ends and the joints and in the covering over them, in the periosteum. So that from brain to bone, we're chemically put together and connected with no staples or glue or other substances to Scotch tape.
Oh, shucks.
Is the periosteum of connective tissue?
The periosteum is a connective tissue, yeah.
As is blood, as is bone.
Bone itself is connective tissue, yeah. So whenever you look in the anatomy book and you see white, you're looking at connective tissues. But just to try to get out of your head that it's just a particular tissue that's located in a particular place, right? That it's integral to the muscle. So last thing about it, how integral? If you take muscle cells and scrape them out of their connective tissue envelopes and put them in a solution and electrically excite them, all they can do is bunch together and contract with no particular direction. When they relax, they just, but they have no particular longer or shorter, there's no direction to the work. If you lay a string, you could think of it like my elbow or any short cut of connective tissue next to the cells will adhere to it, line up, and if you electrically excite them, they'll pull together in a direction. So the direction of force of a muscle is the connective tissue. And so today, it's quite common for people not to use, and to be anatomically accurate, some people don't use the word muscle anymore. It's a myofascial unit. And in fact, properly, really, it's a neuromyofascial unit. Because it's impossible to think of without the nervous system. But when you think of the brain and all of that, that's a separate issue. But just to think of, I mean, it can be a separate issue, but just to realize that you don't have muscles that are alone. They're all interconnected, and they're part of their definition, if you will, in the direction they'll move in, is defined by the fascia that surrounds them, a myofascial unit.
When you said that the muscle units adhere to the connective tissue and then they move in a particular direction, is that independent of bone? They weren't attached to any... They moved just because of the connective tissue, not because the skeleton moved the connective tissue and then the connective tissue moved the muscle.
The connective tissue provides a direction and adheres to muscles, excitable pulp of muscle, so that if you put them together, they'll line up. And when you electrically excite the solution, the muscle now, you can see the work being performed. It shortens and lengthens in the direction that the connective tissue is laid in. It's really important to realize. Collagen is one of the basic substances, and elastin and other things that, and collagen actually is a form of glue that they used to boil animals down for. And use take the collagen out of the connective tissue because it's so adhering. So, before modern glues. But you can improve, like the amount of elastin that causes connective tissues to spring back. Like a lot of people are concerned about that today. Like, oh, how can my skin spring back and retain its youthful form, right? Connective tissues is what sag, not muscles. It's connective tissues. But if putting elastin on your skin is no more likely to somehow enter your system than if you took a stone and rubbed it on your hand every day and your hand would turn to a rock. It's just not